All right, let's dive right in. Today we're talking about one of the most foundational stories ever told, the creation of the universe as told in the book of Genesis. But we're going to look at it through a really fascinating and often overlooked lens, the perspective of Islamic theology and its own foundational text, the Qur'an. We're going to see where these two epic narratives meet, and, just as importantly, where they go their separate ways.
Now, when you think about the creation stories from the Bible and the Quran, you probably assume they're totally different, right? I mean, coming from two distinct traditions, you'd think there's not much overlap. It just seems logical.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. They are remarkably similar. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some absolutely crucial theological differences, and we'll for sure get into those. But the basic story of how the universe and life came into being, they share a stunning amount of common ground.
So let's start with the most important thing, the absolute foundation that they both agree on. Before we even get to the details of light and darkness, land and sea, both traditions begin at the exact same place, with a single, all-powerful creator. In Islam, this core concept is called Tawhid. It's the absolute bedrock of the faith, the idea that God, or Allah, is one, singular, and the sole creator of everything that exists. And you know what? That aligns perfectly with Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So right from the get-go, both accounts establish a universe brought into being by a single divine will.
Okay, so they both agree on one creator. That's huge. But it gets even more interesting when you start looking at the sequence of creation, the actual step-by-step process. The parallels here are honestly pretty striking.
You know how in Genesis you keep reading the phrase, "and God said"? Well, the Quran has an almost identical concept of creation through a divine command. God's will is so absolute that his command, be, and the result, and it is, are basically the same thing. It's this shared idea of effortless, instant creation just by speaking.
Now, both Genesis and the Quran talk about creation happening in 6 days. But here's a really key detail. In Islamic scholarship, the Arabic word used, Ayam, is often interpreted not as literal 24-hour periods, but as long eras or epics or stages. And once you start looking at it that way, the order of events laid out in Genesis aligns incredibly well with the creative acts described throughout the Quran.
Let's just look at a few side-by-sides. Genesis describes God separating waters to form the sky. The Quran talks about the heavens and earth being a joined entity that God then separated. Genesis describes dry land appearing. The Quran says God spread the earth. Both talk about the creation of all kinds of plants. This isn't just a vague similarity, It's like they're working from a shared structural blueprint. Okay, so far, the two accounts have pretty much been walking in lockstep. But now we arrive at the creation of humanity. And this is where the paths really diverge, and where the core theological differences between the two traditions come into sharp focus.
The split really begins with these two pivotal statements. Genesis talks about making man in God's image and likeness. The Quran, on the other hand, describes creating man in the most beautiful form. They might sound kind of similar at first, but wow, their theological implications are worlds apart.
See, for Islam, the idea of God's absolute transcendence is just paramount. This verse right here, "there is nothing like unto him," is a cornerstone of Islamic theology. It means God is completely beyond comparison to his creation. He can't have a physical image or a likeness in the way we understand it.
So how does Islamic thought deal with that image of God phrase from Genesis? Well, it interprets it metaphorically. It's not about looking like God. It's about humanity being gifted with the unique ability to reflect some of God's attributes, qualities like knowledge, will, mercy, and justice, but on a distinctly human level.
And that leads to another key difference, our purpose. While Genesis speaks of humanity having dominion, the central concept in the Quran is khalifa. This means being a steward, a caretaker, or a successor. The role emphasizes trust and responsibility. It's the idea that God has entrusted us to care for the earth and manage it justly, not to just rule over it with total authority.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. We've seen an incredible amount of overlap in the story's structure, but we've also pinpointed a fundamental split in the theological meaning, especially when it comes to the nature of God and humanity.
So, here's the breakdown. Shared foundation in one creator? Check. A remarkably similar process of creation? Absolutely. The critical split happens when we define God's nature, whether he can have a likeness, and that in turn completely redefines our relationship to him. And that difference flows right into our purpose. Is it dominion or is it stewardship?
To put it another way,
If you ask what was created and how it was created, the two narratives sound like echoes of each other. But when you ask who God is in his very essence and why humanity was put here, well, that's where the two traditions express their unique and distinct identities.
And that leaves us with a final thought. These aren't just ancient, dusty texts. They are living narratives that inform the worldview of billions of people on this planet. They shape our understanding of the environment, our place in the cosmos, and our responsibilities to each other. So the question to reflect on is, how do these subtle, yet profound differences in our origin stories continue to shape our world today?
This is just the start of our amazing journey of explaining chapter by chapter of Genesis and trying to see all of the differences and common ground. It's a long journey of faith, and hope you learn in every new video some new fact and upgrade your understanding of faith.